Hello, and welcome to Keep the Channel Open, a podcast featuring conversations about art, literature, and creativity. My name is Mike Sakasagawa, and this is episode 147. Today's guest is Maggie Tokuda-Hall. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the show. For today's episode, I'm pleased to welcome friend of the show, Maggie Tokuda-Hall, back to Keep the Channel Open for a KTCO book club episode about Baldur's Gate 3. And yes, the book in book club is going to have to be in quotes because, as you may know, Baldur's Gate 3 is a video game. Maggie Tokuda-Hall has an MFA in creative writing from the University of San Francisco and a strong cake decorating game. She is the author of the picture books Also an Octopus, illustrated by Benji Davies, and Love in the Library, illustrated by Yas Imamura, the young adult duology The Mermaid, the Witch, and the Sea, and its sequel The Siren, the Song, and the Spy, and the graphic novel Squad, illustrated by Lisa Sturl. Her new graphic novel, The Worst Ronin, is illustrated by Faith Schaefer and is forthcoming from Harper Alley on May 21st, 2024. Maggie is the co-host, along with Red Scott, of the podcast Failure to Adapt, and she lives in Oakland, California with her husband, children, and objectively perfect dog. So, for quite some time now, I've opened every episode by saying that this is a show that features conversations about art, literature, and creativity. Over the previous 146 episodes, my guests and I have talked about books, photography, painting, performance art, filmmaking, podcasting, and all manner of creative practices. But we haven't talked about games before, even though I would say that games represent a broad, deep, and diverse artistic and creative medium. And so I'm really excited to be trying out something new and to do that with one of my favorite people to talk to. Before we get started, a couple of things I wanted to mention. First, this month's bonus mini episode for Patreon subscribers posted on the 14th, and it's all about romance novels, the function of genre, and how we judge the success of a work of art. That and the entire bonus audio archive is available to subscribers at the $2 per month level, and that includes extra readings from past KTCO guests like Ada Limon, Luther Hughes, Ross Sutherland, and many more, as well as short interviews with the writers who contributed stories to the Likewise Fiction podcast, and these bonus mini episodes as well. If you like this show and want to support it, please go to patreon.com/likewisemedia to sign up to make a monthly pledge. There's a link in the show notes for that. And there are also links in the show notes to purchase Baldur's Gate 3, to purchase Maggie's most recent novel, The Siren, the Song, and the Spy, and to pre-order her new graphic novel, The Worst Ronin. I can tell you that The Siren, the Song, and the Spy was one of my favorite books of last year, and I am really looking forward to The Worst Ronin, so do check those out. Okay, let's get started. Here's my conversation with Maggie Tokuda-Hall about Baldur's Gate 3. So how are you today?
I'm fantastic. I'm here to talk about my favorite game. This is going to be great.
You are, I think, the most... So first of all, this is like the first time I've ever reached out to somebody to do essentially one of my book club episodes, but not for a book.
Yeah.
Also, the first time that I was like, hey, do you want to talk to me about this thing that I already picked out? And then the first time I've had anybody respond in all capital letters before.
Listen, if I'm excited, I'm not going to pretend otherwise.
Yeah, fair.
You know? I'm thrilled.
Yeah.
Like, this is actually the second one of these types of games I've talked about on a podcast. I've talked about Icewind Dale, during which I found out that I'd actually beat the game but didn't realize it.
Oh, wow.
I thought that I had never gotten over the final hurdle, and it turned out that there was like one side quest that my game was bugged with or something, and I just couldn't get it to like mark as complete.
Oh.
Anyway, so this time at least I'm sure I beat the game.
So that actually is a good segue, because I wanted to ask you what your sort of history with, I guess sort of three things would be, like your history with gaming in general, with Dungeons and Dragons, and, you know, with this like particular series perhaps is.
Yeah, totally. So, with video games in general, I wasn't like a big console gaming person ever. Like I only really played Mario, like pretty basic. But I grew up with the Forbidden Realms computer games, and specifically two. One was called Pools of Darkness, and one was called Unlimited Adventures. Pools of Darkness was like a fixed game that I have never beaten, but that takes place in like the Dungeons and Dragons world with those same spells and those same rules, but you don't necessarily see dice rolling. Like the computer just kind of does it for you. And I loved it like a lot. And then Unlimited Adventures was a version of the game where you could build your own games. And my sister would build these like incredible narrative, quiet games. And I would make like a big boobed lady with a sword being like, come, we must kill monsters together. And I loved it. It was great. And then as I got older, I found games like Icewind Dale and Baldur's Gate 2 and really enjoyed them, but struggled with the actual gameplay because I'm really bad at things. Like I will just make a lot of like mouse mistakes. I'm not coordinated that way. I have bad lab hands, whatever the equivalent for that gaming is. And those are always like my favorite games. I loved making a party. I loved making my own character and like figuring out what they were going to look like. When I did try to play World of Warcraft, when it was like the kind that you would run around as just one person, the only part I really genuinely enjoyed was changing my character's outfit all the time.
I think that is a big draw of that particular game, to be honest.
Yeah. Like, I just want to be a cool looking lady with a big sword. Like, and there's a lot of different ways to accomplish that.
Yeah.
And so, in general, like, I'm not a big game person. I think I like one out of every 500 to 750 games that come out. I'm like genuinely interested in. But this was one that I was extremely excited for and that my husband was really excited for as well. And that doesn't usually overlap. Like our interests in games are very disparate. And so there's really only been one other game that we got into together before. And it was called Octopath Traveler.
Huh.
And that's another turn-based combat, like kind of narrative game with really different graphics and much more rudimentary writing, but was still just like a total joy to play. And so this one was perfect for our precise needs as a couple as we would play video games together.
Wow. So, for me, my little brother, he's like 2 years younger than me, so he's not actually little anymore, but he was always this sort of gamer in our family.
Yeah.
Especially when we were little. My engagement with video games was to be like the guy watching him play, like with the maps and everything, and say, oh, now you got to go over here kind of thing. Oh,
you're the guy in the chair.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I think that kind of really informs my sort of aesthetic when it comes to games, which is I tend to like games best where there isn't a lot of like finger dexterity required, where I can take my time to sort of think through what I want to do. Yeah. And where it's a really story forward experience. Yeah. So a game like this one, it really works for me. Another game in the not too terribly distant past that worked for me is like The Last of Us, a very story forward game. That one's a little more action oriented than this one. But like when I was a kid, the games that I would gravitate towards playing myself rather than watching my brother play were like text adventures. So partially also that really just goes to show you how old I am. But I was really excited about this game because, a bunch of my friends started playing it. And then also I started seeing a lot of like TikTok content about it. And it really piqued my interest. I resisted for a good maybe month before I finally caved and got into it. But this game is freaking huge. And in the pre-show just now, I was telling you that, normally if I'm going to talk about some kind of art or media or book or something, like if I'm going to talk about a book on this show, I'll usually read it at least twice, sometimes 3 or 4 times, and I'll be taking notes the whole time. But this game, one playthrough took me 100 hours. And so I've only, and I didn't think I was going to be talking about it. So I was just kind of like haphazardly going through it. And I think that in some ways it's really interesting because the sort of skeleton of the game's story is pretty simple and straightforward, but I feel like the experience of playing it is not. But like a funny thing, I was talking to my girlfriend about this game, and she she was asking me, so what do you actually do in this game besides like change your character's clothes or like try to have sex with each other? Do you think you could give like a quick like bird's eye view, maybe the patented failure to adapt 30-second summary of this game?
Yeah, it's like you and your tight crew of buddies all have mind flayer tadpoles put into your brain, and in a quest to rid yourself of those, accidentally become best friends forever and defeat a trio of death god wannabes who are trying to take over all of Faerun.
Nice. I think that was a lot less than 30 seconds. And that really goes to like, you know, in this game, you've got a 3-act structure. Your first act is basically you're just trying to sort of figure out what's going on. You're trying to figure out what direction you need to be going in. You're sort of casting around blindly and stumbling into different characters and different side quests and plot lines. In the second act, you've been given a place to go, and that sort of brings you into this sort of big, you know, world-shaking save the world quest. And in the third act, you resolve all of that. But again, like, I don't feel like this captures the feeling of what this game is like. For me, you know, I played a ton of tabletop RPGs when I was a kid. Not so much as an adult, although I have been really interested in listening to actual play podcasts a lot, you know, like things like The Adventure Zone, or there's one that's called Dungeons and Daddies that's really funny.
That's a great name.
Yeah, the tagline is it's Dungeons and Daddies, not a BDSM podcast.
Okay, yeah, I didn't even think of that, but like good clarification there. Really want to give people what's promised on the tin.
Yeah. I feel like this video game is probably the closest thing I've ever experienced in a video game to the actual tabletop RPG experience, because it really does feel like you are directing the experience, that you're creating this thing together. You know, that's really the thing about tabletop gaming that is, I think, the main draw for people, is that you're able to, you know, get together with your friends and collaboratively create a story together. And here, I feel like you're really able to explore actual role playing in a way that I haven't experienced before in games, in video games. What do you think?
Gosh, I've only played like actual Dungeons and Dragons. I don't think I've ever played it earnestly. I've played it for a podcast, and I played it with a group of friends where we would all get wasted and basically try to outtell jokes. Like, it was not like a serious undertaking. We weren't tracking movement. We weren't doing a good job with like some of the rules of the game.
That is really the best kind of tabletop experience.
Listen, like, I had a great time, but I don't want to pretend like I have D&D cred. I will say, for me, like, playing this game experientially is most like playing those other games that I grew up playing, like Pools of Darkness or Icewind Dale or even Baldur's Gate 2, but just dialed up significantly in its complexity, both in writing, in visual experience, and in options that are available to you. And I do really enjoy that your personality sets the tone for the game in like a really significant way. And how your character is going to interact with the world, because you're always driving them. And so, like, I don't know. I'm trying to think of like a good example of what I mean. So my first playthrough, I'm doing a second playthrough, right? Or I guess technically it's a third, because the second one got messed up by a bug. But I'm doing a playthrough now as a druid, and those characters always have low charisma. But in my first playthrough, I played as a paladin, and they have really high charisma. Like, that's how they're built. And like, so they can talk to people, and people have positive reactions to them in the world. And Adam was playing a rogue who nobody likes, and was stealing stuff. Nobody trusts him. He's always sneaksing, like, had very different reactions from people in the world. And so when every character started throwing themselves romantically at my character, even when I wasn't trying to romance them, we were kind of like, ha ha, it's just because she has really high charisma. And this time we were playing through, and Adam is playing as a bard, which has really high charisma. And I'm playing as a druid, which is really low charisma. And he is failing to romance characters. And I'm already in like a committed relationship with Karlak. So there's like something about the way that we approach, like, I play everything as like, I always give the nicest answer. I always do the thing that's going to save the most people. Like, I play like a romance hero lead, right? And Adam is very practical. I'm like, well, I don't know if that seems like a good idea. I don't trust you yet. And then is like, why aren't these romancing things working? And so it's like, there's like certain things that would help the game play a certain way, but you in your natural disposition, and particularly around a character that is initially called the Guardian, affect the entire game in really profound ways. And I have never played a game that mirrored you back to you like that quite so profoundly.
Yeah. There's like a couple different things, like threads there that I wanted to follow. The first one is just that I was looking up a little bit of stats about the game, and there are an estimated 2 million plus words of dialogue and narration.
Jesus Christ. I was literally just chatting with some friends wondering what the word count is.
Yeah, 2 million
insane.
plus.
2 million plus.
Yes, and about 174 hours of cinematics, which for comparison is about double the length of the TV series Game of Thrones.
That is a really helpful way to think about it.
But you're never going to get all of those in a single playthrough, because you're, like you were saying, you're really going to, your story experience is going to be constrained by the choices that you make along the way. And I really think that it's that, like, just sheer, like, mass of words in the script that allows, like, they really thought through, like, what could everybody even want to do in this. The game was originally released in early access in October of 2020, and it was out for almost 3 years before the full release for Windows, which came out in August of last year, and then the PS5 and Mac release were in September of last year. And over that 2+ years of the early access, apparently they spent a lot of time paying attention to what people were actually doing, recording new dialogue and new cinematics, new interactions.
Nice. Yeah.
And really,
that makes so much sense.
Yeah. It's pretty impressive. It's also just really daunting to think about in terms of, like, the idea that of sort of authorship in something like this, you know, like, I mean, a typical, you know, genre novel, something, you know, like something you might write, for example, I think it's going to be around something like 70 to 100,000 words, something like that. I mean, 100,000 words would be a pretty long novel.
I mean, that would be like a standard adult would be like, for fantasy might be like 100,000, but for like The Mermaid, the Witch, and the Sea is like 85,000 words and is a little long for a young adult novel. Like, it's typeset small. So like 2 million words of dialogue is probably more than I'll write in my lifetime of published work. Truly.
It's amazing to think about, you know, especially, you know, when you have this perspective as a writer, to think about what has gone into and, you know, why it takes so long for these games to be produced.
Yeah.
But
I mean, I've heard, sorry, go ahead.
I mean, it's just, I really don't think there's any way that you could have this experience of really feeling like the choices that you make in the game matter unless they really provide you with so many different branching options here. They really have, somebody had to sit through, probably a team of people had to sit, you know, really sit down and think about the fact that there's more than one kind of story that could be told here.
Yeah, I mean, you hear a lot about how game developers are like deeply rushed and underpaid and in desperate need of a union, which I hope that they form. And I do not know what the working conditions of this game were like, but at the very least, it does not feel rushed in its production. Like, there's so much depth to it. And it, to me, somebody was like, oh, they could have used AI to write some of that dialogue. And I was like, I think some of the great joy and texture of this game is that even NPCs who famously say inane shit that does not matter, like, maybe some of their dialogue could have been written by AI, but it largely has the texture of being written by real people, of being said by real people. And, you know, it's not that every line out of every character's mouth is a fucking banger, but like, there's an authenticity to the dialogue that happens that is like really unusual in games.
Yeah. Well, it's not just that that it's written, right? But it's also like every character is voice acted as well.
The voice acting in this game is so good. And I love that these voice actors are living their best second life as these characters on YouTube shows and on TikToks and stuff like that. Like, get your bag. I'm so pleased for them. It's so cool to see professional voice actors getting their flowers.
Yeah. Yeah. The guy who plays Astarion, Neil Newbon, I think his name is, has become a real darling of TikTok.
Yeah.
But so, this also gets me to, you're mentioning you've played two different character classes, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, for people who maybe aren't familiar with Dungeons and Dragons and role-playing games, when you're making a character, you can pick, different fantasy races. You can be a human, you can be an elf, you can be an orc or whatever. And then you also pick sort of what your character's job more or less is, this sort of archetype that gives you access to different skills and powers and things that are fun to do. You can be a rogue, you can be a wizard, you can be a fighter, whatever. The choices that you make in your character creation end up really also changing the kind of game that you play. If you're playing as a fighter, for example, a lot of the game does involve combat. So you're going to be running in, sort of guns blazing, except not guns,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
As opposed to, somebody who's a little squishier like a rogue or a bard, you might be trying to talk your way through situations more instead of running straight into combat. You also have the option to pick one of 7 different, what they call origin characters. And 6 of those become available as non-player characters. These are Shadowheart, Gale, Astarion, Will, Lae'zel, and Karlach. These are sort of like
Gale and Minsk and Jaheira.
Yes. So Halsin, Minthara, Jaheira, Minsk, those are sort of people that you come in later, but you're not able to be them.
Yeah, you can.
In the beginning?
Oh, no, not in the beginning. You're right. You can add them to your party and then you can play as them.
Right. But they're not origin characters. And then
no, you're right. I'm sorry.
They have this 7th origin character that doesn't show up if you don't pick them, which is called the Dark Urge.
Mm-hmm.
It's an interesting thing. I didn't notice it in my first playthrough, and then I noticed it, and I'm doing my second playthrough as the Dark Urge, which is sort of, you've lost your memory.
That must be weird for you, Mike.
It is very weird.
You're like such a nice guy. I bet the Dark Urge character is real unfun for you to play sometimes.
Well, the reason that I decided to do it, and this gets to the other thing that I wanted to sort of follow up on what you were just saying, is because you were talking about how the game can really reflect back to you sort of what you are like. And what I have found is that different people approach, this game, but RPGs in general, in really different ways.
Yeah.
So for me, I have a really hard time playing a character that's just like wildly opposite to me as just like a moral person, or, people who are mean or cruel or things like that is really hard for me to do.
Yeah.
Because it's hard for me to see the character as being something really separate from myself. This Dark Urge character, for people who haven't played the game, is basically a serial killer who has lost his memory and doesn't know who he or she is, and then has these weird dark urges as the thing goes along. The thing that got me interested in playing this one is that one of the ways you can play this character is that you don't want to be that you have this thing sort of pushing you to do certain things, but you're trying to resist it and still be a good person. And I was just sort of interested to see how that would play out. Apparently, a lot of people think that the finale becomes really resonant if you're doing a resisting the dark urge playthrough.
Oh, interesting.
So I just wanted to see what that was like. But you're right. It is hard for me to play these games. But like, for example, a long, long time ago, I used to run a web forum, and we played a lot of RPGs via the forum. One of which eventually was turned into a hit novel series and TV series that I try not to brag about too much.
What series?
The Expanse.
Oh, cool. I had no idea.
Yeah, so the original The Expanse, I actually had Ty and Daniel separately on the show many, many years ago. Ty Frank and Daniel Abraham are the people that write as James S.A. Corey. Ty talked about how he had originally developed this concept as an MMO game, and then the funding kind of mysteriously disappeared. So he just, decided I'm not going to throw this away. And he brought it to my forum and said, let's do a game. And then he ran a second game in George R.R. Martin's writing group. And then so those two sort of threads eventually came together to become the first book. But it's just interesting because I've had a lot of conversations with Ty over the years about how he plays video games, and we've played, probably 3 or 4 different RPG campaigns over the years, where he was the GM. And when he, for example, plays a third person adventure game, right? Mm-hmm. He's always, which this game very much is, he almost always picks a female character. And his reason for that is just basically he would prefer to look at a female character than a male character, which, whatever. But I always thought that was a really interesting thing because I almost always pick a male character, and that's because I'm a man. And because to me, when I'm moving this little figure around, it doesn't really feel to me like that character is somehow separate from myself. It feels like that's me. And so if I'm playing a female character, I sort of, I don't want to make light of this, but to me, this is sort of how I would understand gender dysphoria because, and I'm not trying to say it's the same thing, but I feel like it might be in the same direction, mm-hmm. because it just feels really wrong to me. Yeah. When I'm moving a female character around. And, but when I watch all these different TikToks, there are a lot of people who play these games. They're like, I want to be somebody completely different from myself. I want to make my character do something that I would never do. And I just find that really interesting because I have a hard time with that.
I have a hard time with it too. I think you and I are both cut from the same gaming cloth, which is like, you will feel bad if the character you play as, your decisions like make a bad result, right? Like where mm-hmm. somebody's feelings are hurt, whatever, like not gonna like it.
Yeah.
Adam is one of those people who plays as like whatever, like he's just his first character was like probably closer to what he might be if he existed in this world. But like he kind of doesn't care. And every once in a while he'll like, when we're like choosing dialogue together, he'll remind me like, you are playing as a druid. Like that's who you're supposed to be right now. Or like, you're this, or I'm this. That's how this person would handle it. And you're like, fine. And, but I think so I think first of all, we might be missing a chance to do something more ecstatic and delightful than what we are doing.
Yeah, maybe.
And that's a personality flaw that both of us bear. But but I think too, sometimes what is underestimated is making the choice to make somebody who's, quote, totally different than you is still a choice that is your personality playing itself out and is still a reflection of you and your choices.
That's true.
So like you're never like really that far away from it.
Yeah.
Like from yourself. Maybe it's just that we are more direct about that and like less flexible in thinking about it, but it is mm-hmm. not, I think, something that anyone entirely escapes.
That's
Adam
a good point.
Does a separate playthrough without me that I call his other girlfriend. He thinks his joke is so stupid. And because he was like, oh my God, this is stupid, I'm like really throwing down on it. And so anytime I come in and the other, like he's playing it, I'm like, I see you're with your other girlfriend. Every time he's like, this is so stupid. So I'll never drop it. And he's playing as a female sorcerer who is a Dark Urge character. And when he's played like other games before that I'm not interested in, one of the ways he tries to get me interested is to make a character who looks like me. And play as that and like let me name her. But this time she does not look like me that much, except for that she has black hair. But it's like kind of stressing him out, that playthrough. And I think it's partly because he wants to be the kind of person who's like, I'm completely different than the character that I play. But he's still like, I can't do the evil playthrough. Like he like can't quite pull the trigger on it. Like it's just too hard and it is too relentless. And the decisions you have to make are so relentlessly cruel that like he cannot do it. Which I think is at once very endearing and also very funny. He like set out, he's like, I'm going to play evil. And I come and check in like 15 hours later of gameplay. And he's like, I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not evil.
I I think that whole thing about making characters that look like people, like my first playthrough in this, I did the same thing in World of Warcraft, was trying to make as Asian looking a character as I could.
Yeah, I always make my characters look just not white is my rule. Like you just like cannot look white. Not if I'm playing.
It strikes me that, this thing that you're talking about where you can't really ever fully escape who you are, even in the choices that you make to play someone, to play a character who's different from you, that's still coming from something in you. And what that reminds me of is this thing that I've often heard a lot of fiction writers talk about, that, all of the characters in your books are still coming from you somehow, even if they're doing things that are just things that you would never do. Even if they speak really differently from how you speak, ultimately you're the one who's making them speak. You're the one who's thinking of the things that they're going to say. Mm-hmm. And I kind of wonder if maybe this is part of the appeal of a game like this, is that, sort of the same appeal that writing or creating a fictional world has, right? That it feels more like you're actually making something. And here, there is a little bit of misdirection happening, because your choices of what you can do with your character are constrained by the mechanics of the game and your dialogue options and things like that. But it feels, I feel like, more creative than a game like, Mario Brothers or whatever. Do you feel like that at all?
I don't know that I feel creative. I feel more stressed.
Do you feel stressed when you're writing?
Yes. It might be that stress is a go-to emotion for me, and this isn't actually a helpful way of understanding the gameplay for anyone else. But I definitely feel like, yes, I am making choices, but I feel very aware that I am making choices within somebody else's creation, because every once in a while, it's not even every once in a while, frequently, I am like, but I want the dialogue option that says this, and it's not available to me. Like, where's the option where I can kind of hedge my bets? Where's the option where I can just say directly, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, there are, and so I think I'm very aware that many people made the thing that I am moving through. And so I tend to think of it more in the way that I think of watching a movie or like reading somebody else's work than I do in how I feel about my own writing, or when I sit down and I'm making my own experience for other people to experience. Like, they feel like very different things. And when I say I get stressed playing this game, like, both Adam and I agree that this game requires like life force. Like, it is not a relaxing thing to do. We do it at night after our kids have gone to bed, but we do something else before we go to bed. Because it's like, it's not like a chill, unwinding experience. You make decisions, and those decisions have consequences. And even when we did our first playthrough, where we save scummed all the time, like, just we're monsters about it.
I'm very pro save scumming. For the listeners, that means like saving your game often and like just reloading if you don't like the outcome.
Yeah. Which is how I have played every video game I've ever had access to where that was an option. Well, right now we're playing Honor Mode.
Oh, yeah.
Which is a version of the game where you only have one save file. You only move forward. You just can't go backward. Like, that's it. If your whole party dies, you can go to your last save point and keep playing, but you've lost Honor Mode. And so this is why I'm actually on the third and not second playthrough, is we started an Honor Mode playthrough for our second playthrough, and it bugged out. Like, it had like a catastrophic bug that is like a known issue. We saw like a whole Reddit forum about it, and we tried the like heroic measures they offered to try to fix it, and just nothing worked. So we had to abandon it.
Oh, man.
Like, a character was just stuck. Like, you just couldn't move him. It was Adam's main character. And it was just
I hope
like,
you weren't too far.
We were far enough in that it is embarrassing that we started over again. It was literally 15 hours of gameplay. We checked. Wow. I was like, maybe it was like 8. And then we looked, and I was like, you need to evaluate your life. But we're doing the Honor Mode playthrough again. And I have to say, like, I would have hated playing the game the first time that way. But because I have a broad contour of what the story is and who people are in the game, and who, generally speaking, can kind of be trusted, I don't mind it as much. Because it gives that stress a real pleasure when you are successful. Like every time we just like walked into a battle, kind of guns half cocked, like not really ready for it, and made it out, like not unscathed, but made it out. And we were like, we did it. Like we like out strategized this moment. It was okay. It only needed to be out strategized because we made mistakes heading into it.
Yeah.
But I really enjoy that level of difficulty, and like that amount of stress is actually proving to be satisfactory to me. Because when Adam first floated it, I was like, absolutely not, hard no. This game is stressful enough as it is. But now that we know, like, are we doing spoilers? Are we being really careful about?
Well, I'm always when I do my book club episodes, I always say there are going to be spoilers, so we can do whatever we want.
Okay. Because my favorite aspect of this game is a huge spoiler. So right at the beginning, you get this like mind flayer thing put in, tadpole put in your eyeball, and everybody is telling you that you're going to turn into this like horrible monster, hive mind monster within like 4 days. And it just keeps not happening. And it keeps not happening. And when you first play through, there's like a real sense of urgency. You're like running around, you're like, well, we got to find a healer. I don't know if we want to rest that much because they said in like 4 days we're going to turn. Like all this kind of thing. And you find out that there is actually a mind flayer protecting you who goes by the name the Emperor. And he has done an ethically dubious thing of enslaving basically a Githyanki prince in like a weird nether landscape. I don't know how to describe, like at another plane. And he has this guy, and that guy's life force is powering your protection and like everybody around you in your whole tight crew.
Right.
And he first presents himself as this character that you design yourself called the Guardian. And I remember when we were designing the Guardian, we're like, why are we designing the Guardian? And Adam was like, you know what the coolest thing would be is like you design it to your specifications of what you think somebody who's there to protect you is going to look like. But then they betray you. And we were both like, ooh, that is the coolest option. So we did our first playthrough deeply suspicious of the Emperor because we kind of thought we'd outsmarted the game. And we're like, we see you, Baldur's Gate writers, like doing this thing. And increasingly, as we were playing, I was like, I don't know, he seems legit. And I was like, doesn't that seem like how they get you? And the thing is, he is just legit. And you just have to trust it, or you just can trust him. You have the option always to just trust him. And now on the playthrough, the second time, I'm realizing he never lies to you. He tells you half-truths constantly, for fear that when you find out what he is, you're going to betray him. But if you play more trustingly toward him, the things he tells you have increasing like scopes of truth. And it is so cool. I don't know, like, how did you play that character and your interactions with him the first time? Because he's also trying to get you to use this power that you have that makes you feel bad when you use it.
Yeah. I did not think that far ahead. I was, when I was creating the Dream Visitor Guardian character, I was just like, oh, this is supposed to be a person that you'd want to look at. Okay, so I'll just, whatever.
We get it. You made a hot girl.
Yes. Yeah. I'm not, what I am still a man. What am I?
You're just a person, Mike. It's okay.
Yes. But I think that the game, it gives you a lot of, just through the dialogue options, it gives you the opportunity to think like, okay, I don't know who this person is and I don't know why they're doing what they're doing. I'm going to be a little cautious here. And the question of whether or not the Emperor is somebody you can trust, I think that's another thing that sort of depends on how you play through it, because you're given the opportunity to make a choice later in the game about whether you want to free this Githyanki. The Githyanki, for the listeners, are just, a fantasy race that exist in this game. Whether you want to free this Githyanki prince and, which the Emperor does not want you to do, or whether you want to let the Emperor continue doing what he's doing. And I think eventually, I'm not exactly sure because I didn't choose that option. I thought to myself, this isn't sitting right with me. I'm going to free this guy. And then if you do that, the Emperor is now your enemy.
Oh, you chose the other option.
Yeah.
So we did opposite things. So the way that we justified not freeing the prince who was promised is everything you hear about Githyanki culture is like really upsetting.
Yeah, it's awful.
Yeah, like they're like very Klingon coded, but if Klingons were all sort of like lawful evil, like loving violence, like they like worship this Lich Queen who is also a lie. Like everything about them is like kind of upsetting. It's this incredibly oppressive regime built on lies, is what you come to learn over the course of the game. And I felt an increasing need to try to get Lae'zel away from them. So Lae'zel is one of the origin characters, and she seems like increasingly disenchanted, but still somehow trying to participate. And I was like, where's the option where you just like shake her by the shoulders and be like, girl, they're not good for you. They're full of lies and you'll die for them. So we didn't free the prince. We let the emperor eat him. And it's like an upsetting moment. Like he like crunches his head. It's violent. And you're like, oh, don't know if that was the right call. But then he fights the final thing with you. And in the epilogue of the game, you find out that Lae'zel is still participating in Gith culture, but they are doing fine. And now there's like a big resistance against the Lich Queen mounting in a more meaningful way that she's leading. Mm-hmm. And so the absence of the prince doesn't end up being like their civilization is lost, which was what we were afraid of.
My sort of reasoning in my first playthrough was that as you're going through, and, you know, we should talk about these sort of side quests. There are a lot of side quests that happen throughout the game. Mm-hmm. Some of them are, you know, fairly simple, and some of them have no impact on the rest of the game. And some of them do set up things with side characters that show up to be important later in the game. Mm-hmm. But the ones that are, in my opinion, the most compelling are all the ones that revolve around your companions. Mm-hmm. Each one of your companions has their own sort of quest line. And in my playthrough, you know, Lae'zel, she starts off as this character. She's like the first person you meet in this game. And it starts off, she's very suspicious of you. She's hyper violent. She's always threatening you and
she is all so kinds mean. Of stuff. So of course she was the first person I romanced.
Yeah, that tracks.
Yeah.
And as you go through, you get these little hints about Githyanki culture, and you start finding this conflict in Lae'zel about how things are in this culture, how they are oppressive, how they're being tricked by this Lich Queen. And the way that I played through it, you get to the point where, you know, freeing this prince is sort of gives you the opportunity to give Lae'zel this moment of like, I'm making this choice. I'm going to side with this prince who we've all heard is actually the evil one, but it turns out the queen that I'm worshiping is actually the evil one. And by freeing him, then that gives Lae'zel this opportunity to decide to work to overthrow this queen that she had previously been worshiping. Yeah. So for me, that was just sort of where I went. I think that it's really each one of these characters, you run the gamut of different sort of character archetypes that you have with these 6 origin characters.
Yeah.
And some of them are people that like I viscerally disliked at the beginning.
Who did you viscerally dislike at the beginning?
Oh, I could not stand Gale at the beginning.
Oh, Gale's the worst. I still can't stand Gale.
He is just such a smarmy know-it-all. Like I think part of the reason I hate him so much is because he reminds me of my younger self, like me as a teenager.
There's no way you as a teenager was this obnoxious. There's just no way.
But what's interesting to me is I really feel like they do a really good job of developing each of these characters in a really organic way over the course of this adventure that you spend with them, that you warm up to them in ways and they warm up to you in ways that feel natural. So that by the end, Gale, I mean, he is a turd. I mean, like I can't really get around that. He's
also a dick in his story. Like everything about him is just like, ugh.
Yeah. But he also, I mean, one of the major things that you are, you know, this comes into play with the romance subplots, but also just your relationships in general with your companions, is as you make choices through the game, you'll see these little pop-ups that'll say like, Gale approves, or, you know, Karlak approves, or Astarion disapproves. Yes. And Astarion disapproved of a lot of the choices.
Of course, because you're nice. Every time you do anything nice for anyone in the world, Astarion's like, ugh, gross.
Right. What I feel like is interesting, like with Gale, is that he is just like insufferable. He's this insufferable turd, but he also like kind of wants to be a good guy. I feel like he's awful, and yet by the end of the game, he really considers you, or at least my character, like considered you like a close friend and a really good person. And
yeah,
I thought it was interesting. And I feel like each one of these sort of subplot side quest things, to me, these were the most memorable parts of the game. Whether it was like, for example, Shadowheart, who, I have to admit, being very basic, Shadowheart was the person that I romanced in my first playthrough.
Adam keeps striking out with her. It's hilarious. I'm like, you gotta, Astarion's clearly trying to romance him. And I'm like, just accept that your bard is gay and like get it over with. And he just keeps trying for Shadowheart.
Yeah. So Shadowheart is like, the sort of what people on TikTok call her the goth princess.
Yeah.
Astarion is the sort of like condescending.
I would call him a mincing bisexual vampire.
Yes. We've got Will, who is like this like very like vanilla good guy kind of person.
He was the first character I was like, maybe I'll romance him. And then I lost interest.
And then we mentioned Lae'zel already, and Karlach is this tiefling barbarian who looks really tough, but is this total sweetheart.
I'm in a committed relationship with Karlach now, and I couldn't be happier.
It's funny because in my first playthrough, I didn't get Karlach in my party until almost the end of the first act, because I didn't know you could jump over things. So they're like, she's on the other side of a river, and you can't get there without jumping. And I didn't know there was
Mike,
like a whole section of. I didn't find
a tipped log.
Yeah, I didn't find it. So like, I just missed her, and like by the time I found her, I was already like on my way with Shadowheart. So I was like, well, I guess I'm going to see this one through. But Karlach is just so nice and so sweet that I thought like, oh gosh. And the next time through, I'm definitely going to go that way, because she just seems really pleasant.
It's extremely easy to romance Karlach. You're basically like, you seem nice. And she's like, oh, come on. And then you're like off to the races.
Each one of these characters, though, I feel like, like Astarion, for example, the, mean bisexual vampire. Mm-hmm. I mean, he's like a dick, but a dick in a really funny way. And completely unsurprisingly, he is a fan favorite, especially the self-proclaimed TikTok Astarion girlies really go nuts for him. Mm-hmm. And, he's a character that, for me personally, I would find, if he were a real person, to be extremely distasteful, and I would not want to spend time with him. But even him, like, if you see his side quest through, his character arc through to the end, he has some, like, in my opinion, one of the most powerful moments in the game.
Yeah.
And one of the things I was sort of thinking about with this game, so famously Roger Ebert, this was, I want to say probably 15 years ago at this point. I mean, obviously he has passed away a while ago at this point, but he made this comment on a blog post of his that video games are not and never will be art. And
that's a stupid thing to have said.
I mean, he's an old man who didn't play video games. And obviously the whole internet got, or at least a certain chunk of the internet got really up in arms about the whole thing. Mm-hmm. But I feel like games like this, and this is not the only one, I've had many experiences in games that I think are pretty on par with some of the most powerful experiences that I've had with art in any medium.
Yeah.
But this game, I think, comes the closest to what I think of as the sort of traditional, like what you get out of a movie or a book. But it's a different experience because it's not static. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, not to be too spicy with the hot takes, but like, I do genuinely think that some of the emotional moments in this game are more profound than things that I have experienced from some of the TV or movies that I've watched. And some because you feel like you have more of a vested interest and that you had something to do with that emotional arc. And in some just because you've spent more time. Like this is like 100 hours it takes to do a playthrough, basically. And like God knows how many side quests you missed and like all this stuff that also like deepens everything. And so it very much has the feeling to me of watching a very, very long TV show.
Yeah.
But where I get to have some say in it. Which I always want when I'm yelling at TV shows. So it's just like, if you remember those times when you were like, oh, why don't you just do this? If the game or if the show was like, okay, that's kind of what playing this game feels like.
Yeah.
For better and for worse, because sometimes your judgment is not as good as you think it is. Yeah.
So if you were to pick out like a couple of the most memorable moments in the game for you, or maybe even if they're just sort of minor moments, minor characters, things that really stood out to you, what are some things, sort of highlight moments for you with this game?
Let's see. So in the beginning of the game, you're basically trying to save like a bunch of tiefling refugees from druids who are trying to make the grove great again. Like there's like a real strong throughout the whole game ethic of just protect refugees. Like nobody leaves home, like runs away from home because they're just trying to pull one over on you. Like just help refugees or just people who need help them. And there's like a lot of kids. And it's pretty rough.
Yeah.
And there's one named Arabella who you initially save from like this awful druid lady who's like the queen of the Maguga druids. And on the first playthrough, her story is just sort of like on its face sad. And then when she feels confident enough to like venture out on her own, you feel like really touched and pleased and still really sad. Like it's very bittersweet. And on the second playthrough, I'm not to the point where we have kind of gotten into the tragedy of her story, but her parents give you this amulet that protects you that can protect you throughout the entire second act of the game, which I didn't notice the first time. Like we read the thing and we're like, it doesn't seem like something we really need. So we sold it, didn't have it, and just sort of like played through it and we're fine. Like you don't need it, require it to survive. But now having played the second part, I'm like, oh, that would really help. That would really be helpful while you're like traversing this area where if you leave the light, monsters come and attack you, or like you have like 30 seconds to like get back into it, the light. And it made me so sad because you realize because you saved their child, they give you the thing they would have needed to be safe and they don't have it. And so they die. And so when you find them in the second act, you're the one who has to tell Arabella that her parents are gone, that they protected her, but they couldn't save themselves. And it's because in some small part of the kind thing that you do. And it is always worth it to save the child. That's what they would have wanted. That's what they did want. That's what they do. But that was one of those moments of writing where I was just like, oh, I just feel like I got kicked in the chest. So it's so true to life in this like particular way, because parents, we would do we will die for our kids. Right. And like, there would be no part of me that would regret that.
Yeah.
You know, but like it just like, or regret feeling such a gratitude to somebody who had saved one of my children. It's very like honest and brutal. And it tells you so much about what the world they're trying to make is. And I thought it was like a really affecting moment of writing.
Yeah. Arabella's story is one that I really did like quite a bit in my first playthrough. She also develops a relationship with this zombie man that you discover early in the game.
He's the god of death. He's Jurgle.
Yeah, well, I didn't know this until after I'd finished the game and seen all the final cutscenes and then also like looked it up.
Yeah. We didn't actually, to be fair, figure it out the first time. We suspected he was Jurgle. And then on the second playthrough, we were like, oh, there's Jurgle shit all over the tomb where you find him. Yeah. He's Jurgle.
It's pretty wild, like, to me, that there are so many different ways that you can play this game that you can just like miss stuff. But it also, like, the game gives you enough of these little breadcrumbs to make you feel like a genius for discovering the thing that you're supposed to discover.
Yeah.
So, you know, like, I wonder how many people get through the game without ever, you know, without collecting the whole party, or without getting somebody like Withers, who, you know, this character we're talking about here, who plays a really important functional role because he lets you do stuff like respec your characters and hire extra people, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's definitely possible to get through the first act without finding him. So like maybe that's a thing. One of the things for me that I apart from the sort of big sort of moments like, Astarion's arc and Shadowheart's arc, I thought both of those were really, really good. And they involve sort of people coming to terms with who they are as people and what's been done to them kind of thing, which I'm always kind of a sucker for that kind of an arc. But there's this minor character that you save in the first act. His name is Barkus Root. And he's like, you find him, he's like this gnome he's tied to a windmill and he's being tormented by goblins, and you don't have to save him.
Okay, I'm sorry. Can I interject really quickly?
Go for it.
You don't have to save him. Of course we did. But there are 2 levers to stop the windmill from turning. Mm-hmm. And on our first playthrough, we accidentally pulled the wrong one. And if you do it, it just like shoots him into the galaxy. Sorry, please continue.
If you save him and you make a certain series of choices throughout the rest of the adventure, he tells you at the beginning he's got this friend that he's worried about. He needs to go find him. And then later on in the second act, you discover, this friend and this group of people that he's, worried about, and you can save them as well. And then in the third act, all of them come back and play a major role in sort of the big plot of the game, where this other gnome group that Barkus has told you about, like they basically want to become terrorists. And this character could be a real throwaway kind of character where he's just this sort of like ineffectual, bumbling, mushy mouthed character who he's just like a nerd,
Yeah.
But if you stick through and you actually make all these choices that you can get to the end with them, he has this moment of kind of standing up to this much more forceful guy who he thought was his friend that I just found really touching, and something that I guess I am a sucker for the, sort of weak, nerdy character standing up to a bully kind of thing. That's not, you don't have to dig real deep into my personal history to understand why that would be. But I found that really satisfying.
Yeah. There's like a lot of moments where you can tell if you play it correctly, there are ways to empower all the people that you interact with. Mm-hmm. And there's one character who I can't remember the name of, but he's a tiefling refugee and he's traveling with 2 friends. And we don't know what we messed up the first time we were playing, but his friends die and he's like alone in the bar, and you try to comfort him and he's just like not having it.
Roland.
Yes.
Yeah.
And later you run into him in like an awful combat situation and you have to kill him. And it's like it like haunts me of like, what did we need to do to like keep Roland safe? What decision did we make that wasn't right? Because he doesn't like, his story is just so tragic. He's just lost his friends and as such has lost hope.
Yeah. You can actually save his friends.
You can?
And you can save his friends.
Yeah,
and,
I figured.
He's such a dick at the beginning of the game, and he's so like sort of supercilious and condescending, even to his friends. And if you the way that I played through it, where you save his friends, you save him, he actually has a lot of character growth as well. It's really interesting how even these minor characters.
I knew it. Sorry, we haven't come to that part yet in this playthrough, so like. It's good for me to know that we can save them. We can save Roland, because it like really bothered me.
The game actually gives you an incentive to do this. I don't think you really need the incentive, but a lot of the minor characters that you befriend along the way, in the final big battle scene, you basically can bring them in as backup and as special attacks and things like that in the last big battle. Mm-hmm. And people like Roland or Arabella or the Harpers or whoever these people that you encounter along the way, Barkus Root, can come in and help you out in your last big battle.
Yes.
And it's an optional thing. I like that that's how it plays out. It's not strictly necessary. And for me, I think the payoff was really more, again, the narrative than the sort of mechanical thing. But it is sort of nice that they, you know, in a lot of ways, I feel like the structure of the game, both big and small, is sort of like, let's build the team kind of thing. Yeah. And ultimately, that's what ends up saving the world. Yeah. Which is, you know, in some ways kind of not a terrible idea. Hey, maybe if we work together, we can do great things.
Hey, don't be suspicious of refugees. Hey, work together. Hey, trust people. Like, there's like a lot in there. Don't trust tech oligarchs is one of the storylines in there. Mm-hmm. The bit of fan service that's in the game that I am deeply appreciative of, having played Baldur's Gate 2, is that Jaheira, Minsk, and Boo are all characters. Mm-hmm. So they are characters who are in your tight crew origin group in Baldur's Gate 3, or Baldur's Gate 2, excuse me. And Minsk and Boo are like the best characters. They have the funniest dialogue. It's a very large man who's a ranger and his hamster that he keeps in his pocket. And I don't know that I had anything profound to say about it, but it was really pleasing to see them folded into the game in like such a great way. Like they feel very correct. And there's actually a little joke about it at the beginning when when you go to Joaquin's Rest and there's like the building that's on fire, you save the counselor in there. There's also a note that you find on the ground. The amount of text in this game is bananas. There's books you find everywhere, notes, scrolls, etc. And there's a note poster thing that you find that's like reward for like the missing statue from Baldur's Gate of like beloved hero who helped save the city last time. And you realize it was actually Minsk, frozen in stone, and then he got unfrozen and he's part of this story now. That's how he has survived the last like 150 years.
Right.
And it was just like a little like, look at that. Because we saw that in the first playthrough. We're like, whatever, this useless note, we sell it for like 3 gold or whatever that you get for random pieces of paper you find. It's just another little breadcrumb for like what's to come. And like, that was the most stressed out I got the whole time, is when you're trying to do the battle. When you first meet Minsk, it is really easy to accidentally kill him because he's been brainwashed. And so he's fighting against you. He's like aggressive to you. And the whole time I was just like like not literally, but like very emotional about it, that like we had to figure out how to make sure we didn't kill him because we were going to start over if that happened. Like, not having it, because I love Minsk so much. And now that we're going to be playing it on honor mode, it's like, oh boy, that's like a moment I'm already dreading of like making sure that that happens correctly, because little mistakes you make like that in the game that feel like not that huge of a mistake while they're happening, because you can raise everyone else from the dead or whatever, are game altering. And I both love and am deeply stressed out by that amount of consequence. Like, I love the ballsiness of the people who made it to be like, nah, there's consequences for your actions. Yeah. But I dislike it as a person who doesn't want Minsk to be mad at me.
I think this the kind of anxiety that I think that seems like you and I definitely have about like not wanting the bad thing to happen.
Yeah, man.
Well, okay, so we've been talking for like an hour already, and I'm sure that there's like a million other things that we could talk about with this game. Is there anything that we haven't talked about yet that you want to make sure that we cover?
Gosh, I think their general representation of evil and the people who they decided to be avatars of that were really interesting. So basically you have to like fight 3 major bosses. They each have like a stone that can go into a crown that can allow you to like defeat the Elder Brain, right? Mm-hmm. Or like control it, defeat it, whatever, however you want to put it. One is this like very sexy lady assassin who basically seems like she's decorated in viscera that she is wearing as clothing.
Right.
Who kind of like slinks around and threatens people with death and fights with daggers. And she's like the goddess of murder.
Right.
Then there's the general, and he's like an older military man whose own daughter fucking hates him because he's kidnapped her, the love of her life, to be a tool in his nefarious plots, who genuinely thinks he's doing the right thing. And then there's the kind of like...
Voiced by J.K. Simmons, it should be said.
Yes, voiced by J.K. Simmons, which was a real pleasure. Yeah. And then there's like this kind of tech oligarch guy who runs a brutal surveillance and policing system of Baldur's Gate that is regarded really well among the upper class in the city.
Yes.
Like they love him.
He is voiced by Jason Isaacs. I did not know that until after I was done with the game.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that either. That is wild. So I don't know. It felt like, not to like put everything into politics, but it felt very clear that at least where they stand ethically is just like in a place that I really appreciated them being so thorough and thoughtful about, like of who you can ultimately trust and who you cannot. I thought was really just like a perspective I agreed with.
Yeah.
Ultimately.
You're given the opportunity to side with each one of these three people if you want to. I don't know what happens if you do that because I didn't.
Yeah.
But what I think is really interesting about all three of these characters who are like unambiguously villainous insofar as they do terrible, awful, really heinous things. Whether that be, ritual murder or this like, totalitarian tech surveillance state or, leading armies to, conquer in the name of this god that they're trying to create. All of these things are unambiguously like, you don't ever think to yourself, maybe they're okay. Maybe it's okay. But I think it's really interesting. I would argue that all three of them, you mentioned that the general character, his name is Ketherick Thorm, voiced, as we said, by J.K. Simmons, delightful. He legitimately thinks he's doing the right thing. I would actually argue that all three of them, on some level, don't really think of themselves as bad guys. And I think that the way that is presented is it makes the characters more compelling insofar as like you kind of like, I wondered at times, like the tech oligarch guy, his name is Gortash. I found myself wondering, like, I wonder if he believes this bullshit that he's saying to me, or if he is just saying this because it advances his own interests. Cause he gives you the same kind of like, law and order kind of nonsense that Republicans like to say here. And it's just the kind of thing where I kind of wonder sometimes, in the same way that I do about actual politicians, like, do you actually believe this thing that you're saying right now? Or is this just like, you're just saying it because you know that a certain kind of person will eat it up?
I definitely just read it as the latter. Like, there was no part of me that was ever like, does Gortash actually think he's doing the right thing? Because Gortash is so clear, and we get a glimpse of it because Karlach has a history with him. And he's sold Karlach into, like, basically forced soldierhood, like soldier slavery. And so, like, we know Gortash is a very bad person who's just comfortable doing inarguably bad things. And I think you asked, like, what were the most satisfying moments in the game? Defeating the Steel Watch was absolutely the most satisfying for me personally. When you basically destroy the means to, like, control, like, have this, like, brutal cop force in the city. Delicious. Great.
Yeah.
And with Orin, I didn't get the sense that it's not that she thinks she's good or bad. She just thinks that murder is right. And it's like such a bizarre, like, okay, like, sure. Like, I don't think that people like that exist in the real world. And so she was the only one for me that, like, had no realism. Like, Thorm and Gortash to me felt like people you actually see in the real world. And she just felt like the capricious nature of the universe that sometimes feels cold and cruel, that often feels cold and cruel, where you're like, okay.
The thing that I found interesting about Orin is that she comes across as this sort of like what you're saying, almost sort of like elemental force of evil, right?
Yeah.
And not just evil, but like chaos and bloodshed. But even with her, you're given these weird little glimpses into like what she was like as a child and what her family was like. And it's all batshit crazy. And they're all like in this batshit cult that worships murder. But like, there's just something about the way that, I mean, it doesn't make her into anything like a sympathetic character.
No.
But just the fact that they give you the opportunity to think about, like, this is what this character was like as a little girl. I just found that really fascinating.
Yeah, but like the story you get is her murdering her mother.
Yeah.
You know, you're like, wow, okay, that's fucking nuts.
Yeah.
So like, I don't know. Like, I think on the one hand, like, yes, sure, you get to see her as a child in some sense. But it still is so outlandishly violent and so like almost fantastically cruel at every given moment.
Yeah.
The only thing you can say to offend her is like to accuse her of, I think, incest with her grandpa or something. And you're just like, okay, like, but by that point, like we've jumped the shark so far, like I'm not even interested anymore. I think she, like, really only through talking about it with you am I realizing that she's the only one of the three baddies that doesn't interest me in kind of a profound way.
She doesn't really seem to have much of like a story arc. So, and she in a lot of ways doesn't even really seem to have much of a personality. So I think that's probably what it is.
Yeah, she just feels like a robot programmed to be upsetting.
Yeah.
And like hot while she does it. And you're just like, okay, like we get it. You're naked. You're creepy. You're weird. Okay. Sex and violence coexisting in ways that are upsetting. Congratulations. You win the Edgelord Prize of the Year. But like, I don't understand. Like, she doesn't. I don't know. It's not a thing either where I'm like, oh, I feel like if I'd had the chance to write her, I would have just like fucking nailed it. I think there is something kind of fun about an elemental baddie who's just there because she likes blood, because it's a video game. And at the end of the day, I'm here to have cool battles. And her battle was really fun.
Yeah.
It was way more fun than the Gortash battle.
Yeah. I think also just the fact that you are given these three different big bad characters who are all very different from each other. Mm-hmm. And so it really sort of gives a lot of texture to the sort of mainline quest.
Yeah.
Well, so the last thing I always like to ask everybody, I've asked you this twice before, so hopefully you're not too surprised, is whether there is a piece of art or literature or creativity in some form that you've experienced recently, other than this game that we've been talking about for an hour and 15 minutes. That meant something to you.
Yeah, I watched The Brother's Son on Netflix.
It was, is that the wrestling?
No,
one?
It is about at once like one young man whose father is the leader of like a triad gang in Singapore, and then his estranged wife and brother. Sorry, I'm not explaining this well. The parents were the leaders of a triad. At some point, to keep the mother and one of their children safe, they sent those two to America. The brother who stayed in Singapore became like a badass martial artist, assassin, like crazy gang leader. And the one who lives in the States drives Lyft and really wants to do improv, but has to do it behind his mom, who is Michelle Yeoh's back. It's a comedy. It's campy as fuck. It's not something that I'm like, oh, this is a perfectly written piece of media. But I really enjoyed it. And it brought like my feelings of feeling separate from the culture of my ancestry to light in a really funny way that I took real pleasure in. Like the brother who's from the States kind of reacting to what the brother in Singapore is like and like what his life is like. And all this is very funny. But also there's like a real sadness underneath all of it of like feeling so distant from something. And which is not to say that all of us in the Asian diaspora just need to be reconnected to the organized crime that is clearly at our roots. But like, but that sense of longing and like that otherness that we feel with the people that we share this like huge identifier with was really like pleasing, and I liked it.
Well, that sounds great. I don't usually add my thing in at the end, but I just wanted to mention, I just finished reading a book that I'm pretty sure that the reason I added it to my to-read list is because I saw Amal El-Mokhtar yelling about it being really great. It's called The Impossible Us by Sarah Lotz. And it's sort of like an epistolary romance novel, but the catch is that the two main characters are living in two different realities, two different timelines, and they can only communicate via email.
Oh.
And they first become connected through this sort of like accidental, like I sent this to the wrong person email, and then they get to know each other. And I've been taking sort of an interest in romance stories and romance novels in the past couple of months, and this fit really nicely into that trend. I do have to thank you in part for this because of the fact that when you had Sarah McLean on Failure to Adapt, that got me listening to Fated Mates podcast, which has introduced me to a whole bunch of different stuff in the romance world. What I liked about this one is that there's a lot of stuff that's like the main central romance really sparkles, and that's great. But what I'm finding with romance is that it's often the stuff that's sort of around the central romance that makes it really interesting and stand out to me.
Yeah.
And here, the fact that they can't be together, and so they're trying to figure out how they can make that work, leads them to do things that I've seen in other books that, you know, it's kind of ethically questionable. And that's usually just kind of like hand waved away. And here it's not. And I wouldn't say that they necessarily always make good decisions about these things. But what's interesting to me is that they acknowledge, and other characters in the story also are like, but what about this? Have you thought about this? This is kind of a fucked up thing you're doing.
Yeah.
And I like the fact that happens, but then, you know, also you do still get a form of happily ever after, and I'm finding I really need that these days.
Listen, it's very therapeutic.
Well, thank you so much for talking with me, Maggie. I always enjoy our conversations.
Likewise, it's such a pleasure. Thanks for giving me an opportunity to talk for way too long about Baldur's Gate.
Anytime. Okay, as I mentioned at the top of the episode, there are links in the show notes for you to purchase your own copy of Baldur's Gate 3, as well as to purchase or pre-order Maggie's books. Do check those out. And that is our show. Editing and mixing on this episode is by me, the music is by Poddington Bear, and transcription help is by Shay Aguinaldo. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please consider supporting the show by making a pledge to our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/likewisemedia, or by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts or Podchaser. There are links in the show notes for that. And you can find all of the show's contact info, transcripts, and show notes on our website at keepthechanneleopen.com. That's all for now. We'll be back next month with a new episode, so do be sure to come back for that. And until then, remember, keep the channel open.